You know, every company, big or small, has this, well, maybe not so secret, but definitely overlooked rulebook. It basically dictates everything from how decisions get made to how power is balanced. It's called the corporate bylaws, and if you really want to know how a business works on the inside, you've got to understand them. So let's dive in.
Just picture it for a second. Imagine trying to play a game, any game, basketball, chess, you name it, but with absolutely no rules. It'd be total chaos, right? Just a complete mess. The whole thing would just fall apart before it even started.
And believe it or not, a corporation is pretty much the same deal. You've got all these different people, the owners, the directors, the managers, the employees, all trying to work together and score for the same team. Without a common rulebook that everyone agrees on, you're just asking for confusion and conflict.
So how do you prevent that chaos? Well, that's where bylaws come into play. They are the official, honest-to-goodness rulebook that brings order and makes sure there's a clear, fair path forward for every single person involved.
Okay, so what are they really? Think of bylaws as the internal laws for the company. Now this is a key point. They don't apply to outsiders. They're all about regulating how the members, directors, and officers behave towards the corporation and each other. It's basically the how-to guide for running the company from the inside out.
So, let's peek inside this rulebook, shall we? What kind of stuff is in there? Well, the law itself, specifically the corporation code, tells us a few things that absolutely have to be covered. Let's break down the big categories.
First up, you've got the nuts and bolts of making decisions. The bylaws have to spell out when and where meetings are held, how people are notified, and all the rules for voting. It also defines what a quorum is, which is just a fancy word for the minimum number of people you need in the room for a vote to actually count. And check this out. Modern bylaws even have to include rules for attending and voting remotely. This rulebook definitely has to keep up with the times.
All right, next, it's all about the who's who and the power they have. The bylaws lay out who's qualified to be a director, what their job actually is, and how they get paid. It also covers how officers get elected, and this is a really important one. It even sets limits, like how many other company boards an independent director can sit on, to keep conflicts of interest in check.
And finally, a rulebook is kind of useless without some consequences, right? So this part covers the day-to-day operations, like how you issue stock certificates, but more importantly, it spells out the penalties for actually breaking the rules. It can also include things like an arbitration agreement, which is a way to settle disputes internally instead of running to court. It's all about making sure the whole operation runs smoothly.
Okay, so you've written this amazing rulebook. Now what? You can't just stick it in a drawer and call it a day. There's a formal process for making it official. And it's not a dictatorship, it's democratic, ensuring that people have a say.
Here's how it works. It's a pretty clear four-step process. First, a majority of the stockholders has to vote yes. Simple enough. Then, the folks who voted for it have to sign it. After that, it gets certified by the company's directors and secretary and filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. Now that last step, that's the crucial one. The bylaws don't mean a thing until the SEC gives them their official stamp of approval.
But here's the thing. Bylaws aren't carved in stone. They're living documents that need to change sometimes. The standard way to do that is to get another majority vote from both the board and the stockholders. But there is a kind of shortcut. The stockholders can give the board the power to make changes on its own, but that requires a supermajority, a 2/3 vote. It lets the company be more nimble, but it's a power that the stockholders can always take back if they want to.
Okay, now this is where things get really juicy. What happens when these rules are bent, or broken, or just flat out ignored? We've talked about the theory, but let's look at some real-world stories from actual Supreme Court cases to see what happens when the rubber meets the road.
And before we dive into these stories, you have to understand just how seriously the law takes all this. I mean, listen to this. The Supreme Court itself has said that bylaws are not just guidelines. They are a binding contract. That simple idea that these rules are a contract changes everything.
Our first case is a total showdown. In this corner, we have a major financial institution, China Bank, and in the other corner, an exclusive organization, the Valley Golf Club. And the entire fight is over one single, very valuable share of stock.
So here's the setup. China Bank says, hey, we have a legal claim on that share from way back in 1974. It was used as collateral for a loan, but the guy who owned the share stopped paying his club dues. So Valley Golf Club fires back. Tough luck. Our bylaws say if a member doesn't pay up, we can sell their share to cover what they owe us. So who do you think wins this thing? The bank, with its formal, legally binding pledge, or the club, with its own internal rulebook?
It's a classic legal puzzle. And the winner is the bank. The Supreme Court's logic was simple and powerful. A company's internal rules are for the people on the inside. You can't use your own rulebook to steamroll the pre-existing legal rights of an outsider who never agreed to those rules in the first place. Your bylaws are for your players, not the spectators in the stands.
All right, for our next case, the fight is happening inside the house. This time, it's a member taking on her own club, arguing they violated her rights by not following their own rulebook.
Here's what went down. The club hit its members with a special fee. One member, Catherine Ching, refused to pay it. So the club suspended her privileges, pointing to a bylaw that let them do that for unpaid bills. But she said, hold on a second, that wasn't a regular bill, it was a special assessment. And your other bylaw says for that kind of thing, you have to give me a formal notice and a hearing first. You have to give me due process. Which she said they never did.
So that brings us to the core question. Can a company play favorites with its own rules? Can it just cherry-pick the parts it likes in one situation and ignore the rest?
The court's answer was a big, resounding no. The member wins. The Supreme Court made it crystal clear. You are bound by your entire rulebook. You have to strictly comply with your own procedures. By not giving her the required notice and hearing, the club violated the binding contract it had with her as a member. You have to follow your own rules, period.
Okay, so after all that legal drama, let's step back for a second. What does any of this actually mean for you? Whether you own a business, work for one, or are just part of a local club, why does this matter?
Let's just boil it all down to the crucial points. First, bylaws are what keep things from turning into a chaotic mess. Second, they are a real binding contract. The company has to follow them just as much as the members do. They protect individuals. And finally, as powerful as they are on the inside, you can never use them to break the law or trample on the rights of people on the outside.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Think about any group you're a part of. Could be your job, a club, even just a fantasy football league. Are the rules clear? Are they applied fairly to everybody? And maybe the most important question of all, are they actually followed? Because as we've just seen, having a rule book is one thing, but respecting it, well, that's everything.